Telling Stories for Hope and Optimism was a wonderful collaborative meeting with Project Optimism and the Centre for Optimism, with our special guests Robert Masters, Olivia Rose Solomons and Neville Christie, with the team from Project Optimism, Jenny Boymal, Noirin, Mosley and Victor Perton. It wasn't recorded with the intention of broadcast, so you'll find that some of the video is more in the style of web meeting. I hope you find the content evocative, as we did, and the people attending did too.
Telling stories of hope and optimism is one of the key habits of the Optimist. What do you see as the opportunities and challenges for storytellers today? Rob Masters, do you want to go first?
I think hopefully the COVID situation is one for optimistic outlooks on life and on your personal well-being. So, as I said earlier, I hope that this might be the last lockdown that Melbourne experiences or Victoria experiences. But I take my hat off to everyone who's remained in an optimistic outlook from there. And it means for some of us to get back onto a golf course, which is a great physical outlet for some of us, even though it's frustrating. And as I often say to Victor, golf has to be made, or the sport for optimists, because there can not be any other sport that is equivalent to the optimistic approach that you have to take to the game. So that's my COVID and golf.
Lots of stories about the ball that just made it in the hole, not many about the ball that didn't make it in the hole.
Yeah, very true.
Olivia, again, what do you see as the key opportunities and challenges for storytellers coming out of COVID?
Oh, I think when you can share a story, there's an opportunity to make real, genuine and deep connections with humans. I think COVID's been a time where it's reminded us of how delicate and special and timely our life is, so it's a reminder to go seize the bloody moment. You don't know how long we'll be on this planet, so make the most. If you can get more present in your life with the relationships you have, looking at health, looking at how we can make our immune stronger. I mean, there's been a lot of gifts over this time if you can frame it with that optimistic lens. And I think one of the challenges, with storytelling and storytellers at this time is the fear sometimes of sharing, the vulnerability that comes up for us, especially at a time of COVID where people have been sensitive and easily triggered, if I can say that word. I don't love the word triggered. So, we were born to fit in, otherwise we would have been extinct if we go back to, when we were cavemen. But now we're in a time where actually standing out, knowing what you stand for, these are your superpowers that can really help to educate, connect and transform people and certain situations.
Wonderful. I often ask people, I say, look, what are your stories going to be? When your children and your grandchildren and great-grandchildren ask you what you did through this. Mm-hmm. And there was an article in the paper on the weekend with Helena Christensen, the former supermodel. And she said, I hope I can sit down when I'm over 100 years old with my grandchildren and just tell stories. I mean, God, I think God sent that message to me. So Neville, I know you're overcome with emotion and coughing, but what do you see as the opportunities for storytellers today?
Well, I think they're everywhere. But first of all, the question of what are the challenges, because I guess at 79, I've lived through a number of cycles of the economy and our society. And I don't think there's ever been in my lifetime as much malevolent storytelling going around, people really finding demons behind every rock, good reasons why the vaccinations are a big corporate, contrick, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge is that life is either a comedy and or a tragedy. I choose for it to be a comedy, but a lot of people at the moment are choosing it for it to be a tragedy, and like we are seeing large numbers of people accepting that they're victims of forces that they can't control. So obviously the opportunity is to counteract that by, excuse me, by storytelling. I think the hugest opportunity is that COVID has changed nearly all of the independent national states going it alone, creating innovation and change and transformation alone. It's changed that paradigm totally. And so, you know, the going forward paradigm is really all about collaboration, community, cooperation, and our stories, you know, need to be told about that. There's just something I've been researching at the moment called narrative economics. And it's a new form of economics that basically suggests that events like the pandemic create the stories, but equally the stories that we tell, negative or positive, create the future. So that the opportunity significantly is to take these negative stories and turn them into a positive. And that's about collaboration, pulling together, not doing it alone, creating a sharing economy rather than an ownership economy, recycling. You know, these are wonderful stories of opportunity and positive, positive storytelling.
Often Norman Vincent Peale is blamed for Donald Trump because he used to sit in the pew listening to Norman Vincent Peale, the author of The Power of Positive Thinking.
Yes.
But I think Trump must have been asleep in the sermon that Norman Vincent Peale gave, where he said, never argue with people except when they're saying negative things.
Yes.
And then counter it. And I think you exemplify that.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Now, for the power of positive thought, Jenny, can I ask you to come on board?
Thank you. So, I mean, I love the responses and love, you know, what's coming out of it. And, you know, couldn't agree with you more, Neville, that, you know, we create those stories and the narrative that actually goes on. And I think often we let the media, you know, Rob, I know this is one of your topics of specialty, you know, really the media creates these stories. I really would be very interested to know, how do you see organizations, businesses, you know, community groups using storytelling really to drive positivity, opportunity, innovation and optimism? How do you see them doing that? So, Rob, do you want to maybe start us off?
Well, I think I would love to answer it in an optimistic, positive way, actually, Jenny. It's a bit like what Neville has been saying. The media has used this to fulfill their overall headline approach to storytelling these days, and that's always a negative heading to entice the reader to read. The positive stories seem to be put on the back burner. And my biggest concern at the moment is the perception of the media as a balanced reporting mechanism for community to actually make up their own minds about what is actually going on, instead of what has crept into the media scene, and that's cause-related journalism or issues-related journalism. They create the issue or they support the cause, and therefore you get a distorted view, and that alienates a lot of people in the audience, and so they've got real issues from that perspective. Having said that, the media itself is a great vehicle to actually stimulate, and just as Victor has highlighted with the article of the weekend, you know, that's the type of reporting that can be stimulating for the broader community. So overall, I think the chiefs of staff and the senior management, and even to a certain extent some of the boards of these media outlets, need to take a different approach to the way they're reporting. And as you said, Jen, going back many years when I used to be a political reporter, we always had to table or submit a balanced story to allow the reader to make up their mind. Yes, we might have had one person or another or an event as the intro par, and it may have had a slightly negative approach to it, but it could also have a positive approach as to the UK trade deal that Australia has just highlighted. That is a significant deal from where we sit. But you'll see a lot of reports in the media saying, you know, these are the people that have missed out, this, that, and the other. But overall, that is a marvellous initiative from the Australian government. And therefore, I think the government should be recognised in that. And third parties need to come out and support it. So that changes community perception as to the value of the media, but to the value of actual story. And, you know, even on the group here, there are many people with terrific stories to tell as to how they can actually change community thinking, you know, with optimism as a base to it. So overall, the vehicles are good. I might question some of the Twitter sphere people because to me that's a negative base outlet. But, you know, people should change their attitude to don't be negative, be positive, and look at the better side of what's actually taking place instead of using as a vehicles for criticism. And one last bit, you know, I assist one of the big charities in the sphere of bullying, and the damage that does to young people and the vitriol that people express to others is just astounding, and it's such a sad element of society. So these channels or communication vehicles should actually start to rethink their real values to making the world, in my value, is a respected world.
So true. Olivia, Neville, can I get you guys to add here?
Very true.
What can organisations be doing to really change this narrative and really kind of highlight stories of hope and optimism and positivity? Neville, do you want to jump in there?
Yes, perhaps I'd like to expand it a little bit beyond organisations, because my view at the moment is that one of the transformations that are occurring is that because there is so many tsunamis occurring this decade, that each individual and each organisation and each institution and each corporation needs to step up and start innovating, transforming, changing, moving from negative to positive. And because I've got a body of 79 and a spirit of 18, I've been over my lifetime to deep dive into 7 major areas of human existence. And I've discovered that in each of those, whether you're talking individual psychology, whether you're talking a corporation, whether you're talking a new start business, whether you're talking a thing like democracy or totalitarianism, every single area of humankind where you can look at, there are 4 basic stories. The first story is the story of the past. And this is the story that explains things. You know, I've got all these bad habits because of the way my mother dressed me. You know, it explains, gives us explaining power. And what we know is that the past never happened the way we tell the story. And we also know that by retelling and reformulating that past story, we get different explanations, and therefore we change the other stories. So part of the answer is to start retelling, reforming the past story of how organisations came about and what they exist for. Of course, the second story is about resources, and that's the present story. So the present story tells me what resources I, as an organisation or an individual or an institution, have at my disposal. And one of the most wonderful, extraordinary things about it is that when we change our mindset and change our past story, we start to see that we've got a huge number of resources available, particularly when we say I as a corporation or I as an individual am going to stop moving from owning and controlling and being in charge of everything to moving into sharing and cooperating and collaborating. The moment we do that, we find that our resource bases that we have at our disposal to create better futures is just enormous. Like, just like we're doing now, we're creating some new resources, some new ideas, and these can be shared. Excuse me. So obviously, and I'm going to ask you what you reckon the fourth story is, because it's a bit of a trick in a minute. But the third story is clearly the future story. And the future story has motivating power, because this is about the positive things we want to change, what we aspire to, where we see the world heading. And of course, the more corporations, to answer your specific questions, and the more individuals tell a better, more positive, more transformative story, the more the narrative economics jumps in, and we actually, Pygmalion effect, we actually start to make them happen. So 3 of the 4 stories, the first has explaining power, the second has resourcing power, the third has motivating power. What's the 4th story?
Well,
No one?
does anyone have a contribution?
Well, the 4th story really is the gap story, because I know where I've come from. I can tell that story. I know where I am now. I can tell that story. I know the future that I want to create. I can tell that story. And the big one now is the gap story, because there's the future. Here's where I am now. There's a big gap. And that story has actioning power. And this is the big thing I love about optimism, because, optimism can never stand alone. The moment we are optimistic, the moment we're grateful, the moment we start to be curious about the world and the possibilities there, the moment we start to ask questions, the moment we start to play and laugh, what happens is that we start to act. We start to actually make things happen. And that's true at every level. And I am absolutely positive about this, because I've been researching it all my life.
Wow, Neville, wow. That's so fascinating. And it's in that gap that a lot of innovation happens, isn't it?
Of course, yes. Yes.
Great.
Well, of course, sorry. The future story, a lot of innovation happens, because that's where we're ideation, we're creating new ideas. The gap story is where we make those innovations happen. We take them to market or to an audience or back into our organization or whatever. So the gap story is the big one. It's about changing action, getting into the saddle and riding the horse.
Love it. Thank you. Wow. Olivia, can I ask you to jump in here? I know you work with a lot of different organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And on a really practical level, how do you get those positive stories out there? How do you change the narrative and really kind of shine optimism?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I just wanted to say this is so interesting. I so enjoyed listening just now to Neville and Robert, and particularly Robert, I really echo what you were saying about journalism right now and those stories. But yes, so with my business, Glow, I work a lot with organizations and companies that want to get their employees to be the face of that company and share the stories of that business or of that role. And so it's different for everyone, and it's such a creative process. And what's so enjoyable about it is that there's a lot of people who have never stopped to actually think, what is my story? What's my purpose? What am I grateful for? What old wounds and trauma am I still bringing into this present moment that are informing my current narratives and stories and relationships? So it's a business service that I'm providing, and it often there's a very personal aspect, because you're asking people to reflect truthfully, and to stop overriding their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, to actually revisit these experiences, look at their values, and to really sit with them, connect with them. So that's part of getting them to be a bit more open and vulnerable and a bit more risque, because sometimes we're doing this on camera too. Sometimes it's face to face, but I'm often coaching them within the medium of video. And then, you know, when it comes to organizations, there's this opportunity where we really get the leaders and teams to really clarify their values and to check, are we living them? Are we breathing them? Are we kidding ourselves about this? Is it just some facade that we've put up? So it's an opportunity to, I guess, take that pulse check and actually go, are we tracking in our lives and in our businesses the way we truly want to? And to actually, I guess, get rid of the cobwebs, to find creative and innovative ways to, I guess, get back to grassroots. You know, some leaders in the end sort of go, why did I even create this business? So people are going all the way back and doing that inner work or the work with their employees to make sure that they really are showing up in a way that is truthful and authentic. And when you get them in that space, the act of storytelling, the act of sharing becomes a delight. It becomes a privilege, because you get people out of the space of thinking me, 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 my imposterism, my nerves, oh, I'm living out of alignment. And it gets them into this space where it's an opportunity to connect with an audience. It's an opportunity to create positive change and, you know, transform certain situations and even make the most beautiful impacts on a person's life, especially with the businesses that I'm working with. Often they're trying to, you know, create these employee stories and these employer branding videos because they want to engage great talent. So when you can show up in that way, more truthfully, more honestly, and attract people who have seen that, they've seen into you, they've seen a bit more into that company. What I'm excited about is for the future workspaces and what that's going to do in terms of retaining these staff, in terms of really bringing our best authentic selves to the table and being involved in initiatives and roles and work that we truly want to be a part of. And I think COVID has given that to us too, that people have taken a pulse check and gone, heck, what do I really want to do in this life? What jobs do I really want to do? Who do I really want to be collaborating with? Because when you get those things aligned, it's much easier to be in that space of gratitude and to form, you know, a huge whirlpool of optimism in your life. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. I think, you know, I think in organizations, it's such a powerful, you know, sharing these stories of individuals that, you know, when we talk about optimism, we often talk about, you know, like it's at the individual level and at the organizational level. And it's so powerful. I've been so passionate recently. I mean, always, but really kind of seen it a lot recently. You see people online kind of calling out people who are doing the wrong thing. And I think that there's such a wonderful opportunity to be sharing amazing examples of optimism and hope and success and examples of people doing amazing things. And that's somewhere where I think we can all make a massive difference. And, you know, it's all little bit by bit that we can, you know, make that impact. Victor, I'm going to pass back to you for the next question. We over to Noirin.
Unmute myself, but in fact, I'd like to throw to Noirin as those of you who've joined us joined us a little bit later. One of the things we're going to do in about 14 minutes is we're going to break out into groups of 5 or 6 to share stories. But as we were starting, I said that Noirin Mosley was online with Helen Clark, who just finished the COVID study, and Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK. And she said, what makes you optimistic? And to see their faces light up at that question was just fantastic. So Noirin, over to you.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, I'm going to ask a question actually about that in a second, but in terms of just almost been hit straight in the face with a story of hope and optimism, that was the response I got last night from both Helen Clark and Gordon Brown. It's actually quite amazing, actually. Gordon's just finished a book called The 7 Ways to Change the World. And I asked him, yes, what makes you optimistic, but also, could optimism be the 8th way to change the world? So his response was, and he sort of, he sort of intermixed optimism and hope in the same sort of sentence. And he said that you really need hope to create a vision. And if you can create a vision, you can change the world. But what he said very interestingly from a story point of view was that don't worry so much about the words, don't worry about the little things, just do your homework, be committed, have the vision, get up there and talk, and that's how you'll change hearts and minds. Trust yourself that you will change hearts and minds through just talking, but you got to be committed and you have to have the vision. So the story that he gave as an example in all that was, and maybe some of you know this already, when Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, apparently he'd had a reasonably big crowd around the time and it was going quite well, but momentum was starting to kind of go. So a friend of his, a lady called Matilda Jackson, apparently shouted up saying, Martin, tell them about the dream, tell them about the dream. And he lit up, and of course the rest is sort of history. So I just think, for me, the story of hope and optimism that I heard last night was, don't worry about the little things, don't worry about the words, get the vision right and just spread it from the heart and it will happen. So on that note, I'd like to ask our 3 panelists about a story of hope and optimism that they'd like to share at this time. Will we start with you, Rob, perhaps?
Oh, well, I think I'll bring it back into the charitable sector. The work of the charitable sector I find quite fascinating, and it is really based on hope and optimism in what they're actually doing. And take it into country Victoria, where they're delivering something like 30,000 meals a week to people in that need. And these people are all volunteers who actually get out there and do it to change the society overall. And they bring everyone from the farmer to the person actually washing the vegetables and various other things like that, and then cooking. So to me, that's a real community optimistic initiative and one to be praised. And then going into the younger children's area, where the people there are actually working on trying to actually bring about a new way of life for young children who have been the subject of trauma in their early lives, and how to bring that change. And one is they have a little knapsack, they fill it with a teddy bear and some colouring in books, and they give that to the child through a carer or something like that. And the children's lives light up, and then they revisit those children quite regularly, but then they do a survey. And 10 years down the track, they still remember the knapsack that they were given at that particular time in their life. So to me, the goodwill of people to actually bring about change in the community is the inspiration that I always take away from. And maybe it's the charitable sector, but it's the goodwill of people overall to bring about change is the inspiration that I see in society today.
I love that, Rob. Yeah, I mean, as Jenny said earlier in her commentary, we've got to focus and highlight the really good stuff that's out there, because it's definitely way more good than not,
Yeah.
That's a lovely story. Thank you. Olivia, you tell us a story of hope and optimism from up in Byron, maybe. No?
I'd love to share a story. I am an actor and presenter. I have my business, but I still very much perform when I have the opportunity to, when I book the work. So part of what I do in my week to make sure I stay emotionally accessible, because anytime you get an audition, you need to be able to access that. There are certain things that I do to keep my instrument and my heart open. And one of those things is I always make sure I spend time in other people's artwork during my week, because it fills my soul, it feeds me, it's medicine. And I'm really conscious of screen time. However, I did find myself scrolling on Facebook this week, and I came across some videos from America's Got Talent. So, you know, I know they're run all around the world, and I thought, all right, I'll just play one of these. Such a sucker. Anyway, I'm so glad I did, because I played a video, a young woman who was 30. Her name is Jane. Her singing stage name is Nightbird. I heard her voice. I mean, I was crying by the end of it, but that's you know, I'm a bit of a crier, so that's not completely unusual for someone like myself. Her voice was amazing. It took me to another place, but it also took me somewhere deeper inside of myself, like a bit of a homecoming. And then they, of course, they interview these people as well. They want them to share their story, which, I mean, hats off to them, such bravery. And she had been through cancer and was still going through cancer. And when they said, how are you going? She said, I'm going really well. And then as they kept asking, it turned out that she still had cancer in 3 parts of her body. And she said, you can't wait until life stops getting hard to be happy. And I mean, even now I still feel it.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible. I feel it so much in my heart, because here's a young woman who's 30 years old, who's been dealing with poor health, and has had the year that a lot of other people, well, we've all been going through an interesting time in history. And she's able to stand there and sing with an open heart, and her lens, her perspective into her life, even though she has cancer in 3 parts of her body, she stood there genuinely, I believe, with a real acceptance around death, and was able to say that she's really bloody good at this time. And it helped me to put other things in perspective. And I mean, yeah, check it out. You know, next time you're on the internet, look at Nightbird. The song's called I'm Okay, and I'm pretty sure you'll be in tears by the end of it too.
It was absolutely amazing. I saw it too, and I actually took away those same points. And I was talking to Christy Roberts, who I believe is also on this call today, and the other point that she mentioned as well was that I just won't let the bad things define.
She said it's so much more than the bad things that happen to me. And I just thought,
that's amazing.
If someone like you can stand there and get to that place, then it's definitely inspiration for a lot of us to work towards. You know, if we're not in that place yet, to go, well, wow, what can I be doing with my life and contribution? It was just amazing.
Yeah, it's a brilliant example of a story of absolute hope and optimism, isn't it, really?
Yeah, truly.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Neville, do you want to round us up with your story?
My story, actually, again, I picked it up on a YouTube video this morning, and it relates to 2 of my great beliefs. The first is that both optimism and pessimism are choices that we make, and that the optimism is the better choice by far. And that secondly, that because of the amount of victimhood that's around in our total global environment at the moment, it's vital that many people, all of us, step up and become innovators, transformers, change agents, social agents. And the story came from a guy that, I don't know whether you can see that I've got no vision, but I'm just showing a book called Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson. And the video I saw was by him. It was from a TED Talk in 2010. And basically he showed the story of a cafe in England. And he pointed out that before cafe and tea came to the UK, people's drink of choice was alcohol. So that typically people would have beer in the morning, wine in the afternoon, gin at night. And the reason for that, of course, is that water was so, choleric or full of typhoid or whatever, that was a good choice. But what it meant was that virtually everybody in the UK was sort of soporific the whole day. Their mind was, somewhat drugged, somewhat in abeyance. And once the coffee houses came in London and tea and coffee became the norm, 3 enormous things happened. The first was that people went from having a sedative to having what's the opposite word?
An amphetamine sort of.
I can't think of the word. What's the opposite?
Stimulant.
Stimulant. Thank you.
Stimulant. Thank you. So the UK suddenly went from having opiates and drugs to another drug, a stimulant. Secondly, that what happens is all these coffee houses emerged all around the UK, and they became absolutely centres of discussion and ideas and what happens was, if you like, the whole foundations of the Industrial Revolution, the Second Industrial Revolution, of trade, of mercantilism, of new forms of capitalism, social change, all started to emerge from these collaborative efforts around the coffee houses with brains that were now attuned. But the point he struck, and the third thing was that out of those coffee houses, they transformed actually into new institutions. So you had brokerage houses started from the coffee houses. You had insurance started. You had stock exchange started. That they actually were established in the coffee houses. And his final point, and I think this is what's so exciting, is that we tend to think of new ideas and innovation as being a solo effort, like the aha moment, the light goes on. But he points out, in his research for a lifetime has been strongly, that most ideas that really take hold over a relatively long period, and they simmer and they are brewed in coffee and tea and whatever, but they are collaborative. And his story and his conclusion is like Louis Pasteur's chance favours the prepared mind. And he says chance favours the collaborative mind. And that to me is a beautiful fact of our current world.
I love that, Neville. So that's really a collaborative story of hope and optimism.
Yes.
Love it, love it.
Well, the meeting continued for almost another hour. We did breakout groups, sharing our stories for an optimism. We welcomed Janine Kirk and congratulated her on her Australian honours, an AO, and we reflected at the end. So a bit hard to share all of that on video, so we hope you enjoyed what you've watched so far. And if you'd like to get involved with the Centre for Optimism. You'll see the URL on the page, centreforoptimism.com, and you can join up for a free subscription, better still, a membership, and dive into the immense content we've got to help storytellers tell stories of hope and optimism.